Wars are not born from malice alone, but often from the catastrophic miscalculations of men pursuing profit in the face of chaos. We've all heard the story. A defeated Germany, crushed by the impossible debts of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, spirals into desperation. Out of this economic abyss rises Adolf Hitler, a figure of dark charisma who promises a return to glory. The world watches as he rearms, invades Poland in 1939, and plunges the continent into the most devastating war in human history. It's a tale of ideology, conquest, and evil. But what if that's only the surface narrative? What if the real story is not a straightforward plot, but a tangled web of financial desperation, where the supposed puppet masters were merely panicked gamblers who lost control of the game? Welcome to Us Financial Market Dynamics. We invite you to listen to the story and join us as we analyze and decode every specific detail. The conventional narrative you've just heard paints a chilling picture of international financiers, particularly American banks, as the secret architects of World War II. It suggests they meticulously engineered Hitler's rise as a brutal but effective tool for debt collection. In this version of events, the Treaty of Versailles wasn't just a flawed peace. It was a deliberately set financial time bomb. The Dawes and Young plans were not rescue packages. They were instruments of control, turning Germany into a financial colony of Wall Street. The 1929 crash, in this telling, was the catalyst that forced the bankers to install a strongman who would guarantee their returns, even if it meant war. This is a compelling and tidy conspiracy, but let's apply reverse thinking. What if the truth is far messier, more chaotic, and ultimately more terrifying? What if this wasn't a story of masterful control, but of a complete and catastrophic loss of it? Let's begin not with the bankers, but with the politicians at Versailles in 1919. They were the ones, driven by vengeance and nationalistic fervor, who created the financial absurdity of 132 billion gold marks in reparations. This wasn't a banker's calculation, it was a politician's pound of flesh. The international financial community was then faced with an impossible situation. A major industrial power at the heart of Europe was being systematically bankrupted, threatening to drag the entire global economy down with it. The circular lending system, involving American loans to Germany to pay Britain and France, who then paid the United States, wasn't a sinister plot for control. It was a desperate, rickety piece of financial engineering designed to prevent the immediate collapse of the post-war world. Think of it not as a cage, but as a series of temporary supports holding up a condemned building. The bankers, far from being architects of a new order, were acting as emergency repairmen, profiting from the crisis, yes, but their primary goal was staving off total systemic failure. Their sin wasn't a master plan for war. It was the hubris of believing they could manage and contain the political insanity of the era through financial instruments alone. They weren't building a weapon. They were trying to defuse a bomb, all while charging a hefty fee for their services. Then came October 1929. The Wall Street crash wasn't a planned trigger. It was a sledgehammer that shattered their fragile system. The flow of American loans stopped. And the music stopped with it. Suddenly, Germany couldn't pay. Britain and France couldn't pay. The entire house of cards began to sway. Now, put yourself in a boardroom at JP Morgan in 1930. Your institution has billions in outstanding loans to a collapsing Germany. The Weimar government is powerless. On the streets, communists are gaining power, promising to repudiate all foreign debt. If they take over, your investment is worth zero. You are facing a financial apocalypse. In this environment of pure panic, a fringe political party, the Nazis, begins to make noise. They are nationalists, they are rabidly anti-communist, and most importantly, their leader, Adolf Hitler, promises to restore order and, crucially, honor Germany's international financial obligations. The conventional narrative says the bankers chose Hitler as their enforcer. But reverse the lens. Did they choose him? Or did they simply back the only horse in the race that wasn't running directly toward the cliff of total default? It wasn't a strategic endorsement. It was a desperate gamble. They didn't see a future dictator who would set the world on fire. They saw a bulwark against communism, a strongman who might, just might, stabilize the country enough for them to get their money back. They weren't funding a war machine. They thought they were funding a glorified collections agent. This lens of desperation, not conspiracy, recontextualizes the shocking involvement of American corporations in Germany's rearmament. Did IBM provide punch card technology to the Nazis as part of a grand plot? Or was its German subsidiary, Die Hamag, simply a business operating in Germany, fulfilling lucrative government contracts in the nation where it was based? When Opel, owned by General Motors, and Ford's German plants began producing trucks for the Wehrmacht, was this a directive from Detroit to arm the Third Reich? Or was it immoral, profit-driven capitalism at its most naked? These corporations followed the money. The new German government was spending billions on industrial and military infrastructure. To them, it wasn't about ideology. It was about market share. They weren't co-conspirators. They were willing suppliers, blinded by profit margins to the ultimate purpose of the goods they were producing. The failure was moral, a profound abdication of responsibility. But it wasn't necessarily a coordinated plot to start a war. They were all individual actors, from bankers to industrialists, making what they saw as rational, profitable decisions within a system spiraling into madness. They all believed they could manage the risk. They were all wrong. The Bank for International Settlements, often pointed to as the nerve center of this conspiracy, also looks different through this lens. Established in 1930, its official purpose was to manage the very reparation payments that were causing the crisis. It was intended to be an apolitical, neutral, technocratic institution, a central bank for central banks that could stabilize the flow of global capital. The conventional story sees it as a sinister tool, a place where Allied and Axis bankers colluded before and during the war. The reverse thinking asks, what if the BIS was an institution so fanatically devoted to its mission of financial neutrality that it became morally blind? Its directors, including Americans and Britons, continued meeting with their German counterparts throughout the war, not because they were all on the same side, but because they believed the integrity of the international financial plumbing transcended the messy business of war. They saw themselves as custodians of a system that would be needed to rebuild the world, no matter who won. This wasn't evil collaboration so much as a dangerous, almost pathological detachment from the human reality of the conflict their system was funding. They were protecting the integrity of the machine, even as that machine was processing gold teeth from concentration camps. The true turning point, the moment the bankers' gamble utterly failed, was when Hitler consolidated absolute power. They had backed a strong man to stabilize their investments, but they had instead unleashed a force of nature that served no master but itself. He took their money, their technology, and their industrial support and built a war machine for his own ideological purposes. The invasion of Poland in 1939 wasn't the start of a debt collection operation for Wall Street. It was the horrifying moment the bankers realized the asset they had funded had gone rogue and was now going to liquidate the entire continent, threatening their investments on a scale they had never imagined. The war they had inadvertently enabled now posed the single greatest threat to their global system. The narrative of World War II is not the story of bankers successfully executing a plan. It is the story of their plan's spectacular failure. They had hoped to use German nationalism to protect their capital, but instead, German nationalism consumed everything. From 1939 onwards, the American financial establishment was no longer trying to manage a German recovery. It was in a desperate race to finance the side that could stop the monster they had helped create. The Lend-Lease program wasn't just a geopolitical strategy. It was a massive new line of credit extended to the Allies to contain the damage. Just as in World War I, the United States became the financier of the conflict. But this time, it wasn't about profiting from a distant European squabble. It was about funding the fire brigade to put out a blaze that threatened to burn down their own house. The longer the war raged, the deeper the Allies went into debt to the United States. Britain, once the world's creditor, was bled dry, its empire mortgaged to Washington. This leads us to Bretton Woods in 1944. The standard conspiracy narrative sees this as the final triumphant act, the moment the American bankers formalized the global dominance they had planned all along. But if we see the war as their greatest failure, Bretton Woods looks very different. It wasn't a victory parade. It was an emergency summit in the middle of a disaster. The delegates gathered not to celebrate a successful scheme, but to figure out how to build a new system from the rubble of the old one. This new system could prevent such a catastrophic loss of control from ever happening again. The establishment of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, and the creation of the IMF and the World Bank were not just power grabs, they were mechanisms of control. They were designed to create a more centralized, American-led financial order with built-in safeguards, tripwires, and lenders of last resort. It was an admission that the old, laissez-faire system of private finance had failed spectacularly. The bankers had learned a terrifying lesson from Hitler. Never again could they allow a debtor nation to become so powerful it could threaten the entire creditor system. The post-war order, including the Marshall Plan, was the implementation of this lesson. West Germany was rebuilt, its debts restructured on manageable terms, not out of generosity, but out of cold, hard calculation. A stable, prosperous, and indebted West Germany was a reliable asset. A crushed, resentful Germany was a liability that could spawn another Hitler. The financiers had learned that profitable long-term debt servitude was infinitely preferable to a debtor who defaults through catastrophic war. The Cold War that followed was a continuation of this new paradigm. The Soviet Union represented the ultimate threat, a massive, autarkic economic bloc entirely outside the dollar-denominated debt system. The conflict was ideological, yes, but it was also a 40-year struggle to bring the last major holdout into the Bretton Woods system. The arms race forced the USSR into unsustainable spending, leading it to borrow from Western banks and ultimately collapse not under military invasion, but under the weight of bankruptcy. The pattern was now perfected. The chaos of the 1930s had been replaced by a more stable, manageable system of global debt managed from Washington. So what is the new truth we uncover with this reverse perspective? The horror of the Second World War's financial origins is not found in a neat conspiracy of evil men in smoky rooms. That would be too simple, too comforting. The real horror is more profound. It is the story of an impersonal, amoral financial system, driven by the simple logic of debt and return, that can, when combined with political instability, produce outcomes of unimaginable monstrosity without any single person having planned it. The bankers and industrialists were not master villains orchestrating a war. They were greedy, arrogant, and short-sighted men who made a series of what they considered rational choices to mitigate risk and maximize profit. They fed a beast, believing they could control it, and were shocked when it turned and devoured the world. Their ultimate victory at Bretton Woods was not the culmination of a master plan, but a desperate, post hoc scramble to impose order on a world they had helped plunge into chaos. They didn't win the game they set out to play. They just managed to write the rules for the new one that began after the board was wiped clean by 50 million deaths. We are not living in a world shaped by a successful banking conspiracy. We are living in the world that was built to prevent their greatest mistake from ever happening again. It is a world of managed debt, of central bank control, and of institutions designed to prevent collapse at all costs. But the fundamental logic remains. The system prioritizes the repayment of creditors over all else. And it is a constant reminder that the greatest catastrophes in history are rarely the product of a single evil design. More often, they are the unintended consequences of a system following its own cold logic, dragging all of us along with it. This video analyzes historical economic cycles and current indicators for educational purposes, not financial investment advice. Please consult a professional before making investment decisions. If you enjoyed listening to the story, please press like, share this video, and leave a comment with your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the US Financial Market Dynamics channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos.